When you finally stop chasing people, something shifts, not in them, in you. Because for the first time, your energy stops leaking outward. You stop pouring your worth into hands that never knew how to hold it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your life begins to reorganize itself around a higher truth. That your value was never tied to how available you were, but to how deeply you could stand alone. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say, at least not in words, is that most people never get close to that privilege, because most people are too busy trying to be what others want them to be. We make ourselves available to everyone, to their needs, their validation, their approval. We shapeshift, compromise, adapt, all in the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, will finally see us. And in that process, we lose the one thing that made us unique, our inner authority. This is the quiet tragedy of the modern soul. We confuse attention with connection. We think being seen is the same as being known, but they're not the same thing. One feeds the ego, the other feeds the soul. And here's the paradox. When you're always available, people stop valuing you. When you say yes to everything, your yes means nothing. When you overextend yourself, you teach others that your time and your energy are cheap. But the moment you pull back, the moment you set a boundary, something extraordinary happens. The world starts to mirror back the value you see in yourself. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a whole, self-directed being. Not a reflection of your parents' expectations, not a projection of your social circle, not a reaction to rejection, but a human being who stands on his own psychic ground. You see, every time you say no, you're not just setting a limit. You're carving out a sacred space for your true self to emerge. Because every yes to others is a no to yourself, unless it's grounded in alignment. Most people live fragmented lives. Pieces of themselves scattered across old conversations, forgotten relationships, and endless digital noise. And when they finally stop being available, it's not an act of arrogance. It's an act of psychic reclamation. Jung believed that the unconscious constantly tries to bring us back into wholeness, that the deeper self, the one beneath the roles, the masks, the noise, is always trying to surface. But it can't reach you if you're drowning in everyone else's expectations. When you become too available, you're essentially living in psychological exile. You've abandoned your inner kingdom for the illusion of belonging. You've handed the keys of your worth to people who don't even know the door exists. And that's why so many people feel invisible, not because others can't see them, but because they've stopped seeing themselves. It's not rejection that hurts most. It's self-abandonment. When you start honoring your own boundaries, people will call you distant. They'll call you cold. They'll say you've changed. And they'll be right. You have changed. Because you've finally stopped performing the role that kept you trapped in their expectations. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And for most people, fate looks like chasing love that doesn't love them back. It looks like being the fixer, the healer, the listener, the one who's always there, until you realize that no one's there for you. So you reach a breaking point. You stop texting first. You stop explaining yourself. You stop being the emotional anchor for people who never learned to swim. And suddenly, silence. It's uncomfortable, painful even. But in that silence, something sacred stirs. A quiet strength begins to take root. You start to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You start to feel the weight of your own presence. And for the first time, you realize that solitude isn't emptiness. It's space. Space where truth can breathe again. This is the beginning of inner authority. The moment your validation shifts from external to internal, you stop waiting for someone to choose you because you've already chosen yourself. And ironically, that's when the world starts to take notice. But let's be honest, this transformation isn't glamorous. It's not a soft, aesthetic kind of growth. It's raw, it's lonely, It's the slow, painful death of every version of yourself that once begged to be accepted. And that's exactly why it's powerful, because you can't step into your higher self while clinging to the approval of others. You can't become who you're meant to be while staying loyal to who you were. Jung understood this paradox deeply. He believed that individuation required conflict, the confrontation between the ego and the self, between who we think we are and who we truly are. When you stop being available, you ignite that confrontation. The ego resists. It panics, it rationalizes, it tries to pull you back to old patterns. Because the ego thrives on being needed, it craves attention, recognition, drama. But the self, the deeper consciousness, craves wholeness, and wholeness demands solitude. It demands reflection. It demands that you walk through the inner desert alone, with nothing but your own presence as a compass. That's the real reason people fear detachment, not because of loneliness, but because of what they might find in the silence. Because when there's no one left to impress, you finally have to face yourself, your fears, your insecurities, your wounds. But that's where the real alchemy begins. That's where your shadow, the part of you you've rejected, starts to integrate. And when you integrate your shadow, you no longer chase what abandons you. You no longer beg for what's beneath your worth. You begin to walk differently, speak differently. People feel it before they see it, because energy doesn't lie. The less available you are to what drains you, the more available you become to what grows you. And that's where everything changes. When you start pulling your energy back, the world begins to react. People who once depended on your availability will question it. They'll notice your silence, not because they miss you, but because they miss the access. And this is where your test begins. Because when you stop being available, life immediately tempts you to regress. You'll receive the "Hey, stranger" texts. You'll get sudden interest from people who once ignored you. And your mind, desperate for comfort, will whisper, maybe they've changed. Maybe this time is different, but it's not. It's just the void calling you back. And if you answer, you'll fall right back into the same pattern of overextending, overgiving, and under-receiving. This is where Carl Jung's teachings hit hardest. He warned that what you most need to learn will appear as temptation, the pull toward the very thing you're trying to outgrow. It's not about the people, it's about the pattern, the psychic loop that keeps you chained to your lesser self. So when you withdraw, you're not punishing anyone. You're simply ending the energetic transaction that was keeping you small. Because here's the truth. You can't evolve while staying accessible to what drains your soul. Growth demands isolation. Every metamorphosis requires a cocoon, but the cocoon feels like death, because in many ways, it is. The old you starts to dissolve, the version that lived for others, the one that needed validation to feel real, the one that kept answering messages just to avoid feeling forgotten. That self begins to disintegrate, and it hurts. Your mind will resist it. Your emotions will rebel. You'll crave connection like an addict craves a fix, because that's what overavailability really is, an addiction to attention. But the moment you stop feeding that addiction, something higher awakens, a deeper awareness that whispers, you were never meant to be everyone's source of light. You were meant to protect your own flame. This is the psychology of withdrawal, the unseen transformation of your inner landscape. You stop seeking mirrors in other people and begin to see yourself directly. At first, it feels like loss, but what you're losing isn't love, it's illusion. Illusion that said you had to be needed to be worthy. Illusion that said you had to be reachable to be loved. Illusion that said your silence equaled rejection. But silence is not rejection. Silence is power, because in silence the true signals finally become audible. You start hearing your intuition again. You start noticing what your body has been trying to tell you, that certain people make you anxious, certain conversations leave you empty, certain spaces drain your soul. And when you stop being available to those things, your nervous system exhales, your mind clears, your energy stabilizes. This is not arrogance, this is alignment. You are no longer negotiating your peace for the sake of connection. You are no longer dimming your awareness just to stay included, because inclusion means nothing if it costs your authenticity. Jung believed that the unconscious compensates for every imbalance. If you've lived too long in the light, pleasing, performing, pretending, your shadow will emerge to balance you. It will demand solitude. It will pull you inward. It will whisper, withdraw. And when you listen, your shadow stops being an enemy. It becomes your compass. It starts guiding you toward what's real. You begin to see how your over-availability was never kindness. It was fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of not mattering. Fear of abandonment. But here's the paradox. You were abandoning yourself every time you refused to rest, every time you over-explained, every time you made space for someone who never showed up for you. When you stop doing that, your energy consolidates. It gathers like a storm, quiet, focused, unstoppable, and the world feels it. Suddenly, the same people who once took you for granted start to wonder what changed. They feel your absence like gravity, because that's what true presence is. Not constant communication, but energetic consequence. You don't have to chase. You don't have to announce. You don't have to prove. Your withdrawal speaks louder than any explanation ever could, because people feel when your energy is no longer available. They sense the shift. They may not understand it, but they feel it, and that's when the roles reverse. Those who once ignored you start to notice you. Those who once overlooked you begin to question their judgment. Those who once drained you start to crave your presence, not because you changed them, but because you changed your energy. You became scarce, and in a world addicted to constant access, scarcity creates value. This is not manipulation, and it's magnetism. It's the natural law of energy. What you withhold from chaos, you invest into creation, and slowly, life begins to reorganize around your new frequency. Opportunities align. New relationships form, not from need, but from mutual respect. You start attracting people who value what you don't give away freely. That's when you understand. Your availability was never the source of love. Your energy was. And now that it's contained, it's magnetic. This is the alchemy of detachment, turning emotional scarcity into spiritual abundance. Because when you finally stop scattering your power, it begins to multiply. It returns to you as clarity, as focus, as peace, and the world will feel different, quieter, slower, but somehow deeper. Conversations become more intentional, your work becomes more meaningful. Even your solitude feels sacred. You realize you were never lonely, you were simply surrounded by noise. And now, in that stillness, something profound emerges. You begin to trust yourself again, not the surface-level self that seeks approval, but the deeper, quieter intelligence that always knew who you were, that voice you used to ignore, the one that whispered, "You don't belong there. This connection is draining you. You deserve more." That voice, your intuition, becomes your compass again. Because the moment you stop being available to the world, you finally become available to yourself, and that changes everything. There comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when your solitude no longer feels like isolation. It begins to feel like sovereignty. You start waking up lighter. Your phone is silent, but your mind isn't anxious anymore. You no longer measure your worth by how many people need you. You measure it by how deeply you can stay centered when no one does. This is where true power begins, not in domination, not in control, but in self-possession. You have gathered your scattered energy, and it now orbits around a single truth. You belong to yourself. Carl Jung called this the emergence of the self, the moment when the conscious and unconscious unite and the human being becomes whole. It's not an event, it's an awakening, a realization that you no longer have to chase what you already are. Because when you stop being available, the world finally meets you on different terms. You stop attracting situations that feed on your insecurity. You start attracting ones that resonate with your wholeness. People sense it. They can't explain it, but they feel something in your presence. A calm authority, an inner gravity. You don't demand respect anymore. You embody it. You've become the person who no longer asks, "Why don't they value me?" Because now you know. Value is self-generated. And in that knowing, the entire rhythm of your life changes. You stop reacting. You start responding. You stop proving. You start becoming. You stop seeking closure. You start creating direction. Everything slows down, yet somehow everything moves faster because there's no more resistance. You are no longer leaking energy into dead conversations or trying to resurrect expired versions of yourself. You are fully present, fully alive, fully here, and people notice. Not the loud ones who used to drain you, but the quiet ones who operate on the same frequency. They'll recognize you instantly because they too have walked through the fire of withdrawal and come out shining. This is how tribe forms, not from proximity, but from resonance. You stop chasing crowds and start aligning with kindred souls. You stop performing for attention and start creating from authenticity. And here's the beautiful paradox. The less you try to be seen, the more visible you become. Because authenticity has its own light. It doesn't need a spotlight. It is the spotlight. You begin to speak differently. Fewer words, but each one lands with weight. You walk into rooms and say nothing, yet your presence shifts the atmosphere. Not because of arrogance, but because of integrity. You've faced your shadow and made peace with it. You've embraced your solitude and found power in it. You've stopped being available to chaos, and chaos can no longer find you. This is the rebirth Jung hinted at, the return to the self after the long exile of people-pleasing. Now your boundaries aren't walls. They're gates of discernment. Not everyone gets access, only those who honor the energy you protect. And the irony? Once you become this version of yourself, you no longer crave what you once lost. You no longer chase what walked away, because you understand what left wasn't meant to stay in the presence of your evolution. You've stopped asking, "Why did they treat me that way?" Instead, you ask, "Why did I allow it?" And that question changes everything, because ownership is power. The moment you take responsibility for your availability, you reclaim the steering wheel of your life. You stop being a passenger in other people's stories and start authoring your own. You become deliberate with your time, your focus, your energy. Every interaction becomes intentional. Every yes becomes sacred. And the world responds in kind. Doors open, opportunities unfold, not because of luck, but because you've aligned your frequency with clarity. Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." When you stop resisting solitude, it transforms into strength. When you stop resisting endings, they transform into beginnings. When you stop resisting stillness, it transforms into power. Because here's the ultimate revelation. You were never meant to be universally available. You were meant to be selectively present, to guard your energy like sacred currency and invest it where it multiplies meaning. So now you move differently. You don't explain your silence. It explains itself. You don't rush to fill the gaps. The right people will meet you in the stillness. You don't fear missing out. You fear losing yourself again. You've stepped out of the loop of need and entered the field of purpose. And purpose doesn't beg for attention, it commands it. When you stop being available to what diminishes you, you become available to destiny. That's when alignment begins to feel effortless. Life stops testing your worth and starts reflecting it. And one day, without even noticing, you'll look around and realize everything changed. Not because the world shifted, but because you did. You became the calm in the storm, the silence that speaks volumes, the presence that needs no introduction. You learned that love doesn't chase, respect doesn't demand, peace doesn't negotiate. It simply is. And now, so are you. Because when you finally stop being available to everyone else, you become deeply, unshakably available to the one person who always mattered most, yourself.